Right, I am delighted to welcome our guest for this week's You Had to Be There. It is none other than the legendary French sports journalist Phillipe Auclair. Philippe, good morning to you. How are you?
Not too bad. Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
When we asked you, expected 5 football, but actually it is heavily skewed in favour of cricket.
I'm afraid so. Cricket is my favourite game. I hesitated because, to be honest, the thing is that when you asked me, I had to be there. First of all, I had to choose the occasions on which I was at the ground where it happened. And the second thing, I had to think of individual performances, and which is not my way of looking at things normally. I can think of team performances, for example. I would certainly have put, Arsenal's 2-1 win over Barcelona as one of my 5 moments if it had been for just a sporting occasion. But if I have to take one player out or one singular individual performance out, I think, no, that doesn't quite work. So obviously, cricket being a game which is both team sport and individual sport lends itself more, I think, to this kind of thing.
Okay, that's it.
And I think that,
I
think, yes, I think it is quite logical, but there's quite a bit of football though.
There's loads of football. I'm interested in, again, that it's club football as opposed to international football that you've gone for.
Yeah, for the simple reason that I've attended thousands of club games and perhaps only hundreds of international games. So otherwise I would have said, okay, Michel Platini, and I could have taken 5 performances by Michel Platini, for example. But I wasn't there when he scored the winning goal in the final of the 1984 European Championship. I wasn't there. So again, it's the thing of what matters is the imprint it leaves on you, almost physically, as a matter of fact, because you're part of this giant organism, which is a sport audience, and you participate in a way which is completely different from the way that, say, I could think, for example, Yannick Noah winning the French Open, which was a huge moment for all of us. And for me, I was a very keen tennis player at the time. But again, I was not at Roland Garros. Whereas I can promise you, I was at every single of these 5 occurrences.
Okay, well, let's start with a match between Pakistan and England at the Oval. This is the 5th test in 1987. Abdul Qadir is not going to be a name that many of our viewers this morning here in Ireland are watching, but I'm sure that our English viewers are like, oh yeah, we remember this. So can you put a bit of context on this performance for us?
Well, first of all, I passed the cricket test. I'm an England supporter. And strangely enough, the 2 cricket performances I've chosen have both been against England. So which should tell you something about how amazing they were. Abdul Qadir, to those who don't know him, was, because he's unfortunately left us, probably one of the all-time great spin bowlers in cricket. And he was, at the time, a kind of dinosaur. He was the last exponent of a dying art, or what people thought was a dying art, which was leg spin bowling. And I'd fallen in love with cricket as soon as I settled in London and started to go to games watching Middlesex. And this, amazingly enough, was the very first test I went to at the Oval. Yeah. And I wouldn't say I chose wisely, because this was not the time of baseball where, the England team goes at 5 runs and over. It was quite a stodgy affair. Javed Miandad scored 260, I believe, in an innings that seemed to last forever. Mudassar Nazar was there, which is a name that will send chills down the spine of everybody who wants their cricket to be played at a good pace. But anyway, it was a grand occasion. And you have to say that some of the players in both teams, rank amongst, the greatest of the generation. So, for example, Pakistan, the captain was Imran Khan. Javed Miandad was batting. The great Wasim Akram, probably the greatest left-arm swing and fast bowler of all time, was also there. And, England still had players like Mike Gatting was at the time the captain. He had won the Ashes in the winter. David Gower, the great David Gower, was batting. It was 2 very, very strong teams. And it was the flattest of pitches. It's like nothing was happening. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, comes this weird animal. As I said, a dinosaur. I've compared him sometimes to a coelacanth. It's like you think it's a species which has disappeared, and you find in the depth of the ocean a living fossil. And he's not only the exponent of a dying art, but he's one of the greatest exponents of this dying art. And what I've when I fell in love with cricket, I fell in love with the intricacy of it, with the complexity of it, but also with the fact that it was possible to be a fabulous bowler and to send the ball down actually more slowly than I, as a starter, as a beginner, could do it in the nets. I think, how is that possible? You should be smashed to all part of the parks. And obviously, it's a bit more complicated than that. And Kadir was also somebody who had a quasi-mystical approach to his cricket. So he was a very proud Pakistani, and he defended his national team. Sometimes, he was incredibly competitive and incredibly aggressive on the field. But there was also another element to him, was that for him, the art of leg spin, which is really an art form, one of the, greatest art forms in sport, was also about getting in touch with some kind of greater truth. And to do that by constant practice and thinking and evaluation of his own art. And he had developed an arsenal of deliveries that I think very few other leg spinners or slow bowlers have ever developed in the game, including Shane Warne. And he knew, and I know maybe we're talking to people who are not necessarily that much into cricket, but for example, one of the weapons of a leg spinner is the googly, right? Which is the wrong one, which goes the other way that you're expecting to do. Well, Abdul Qadir didn't have one, he had three. He had one that he made sure that the batsman could identify, so that the batsman would think afterwards, yeah, okay, that's a googly coming. Except he had the second one, which was a bit more disguised, and he had the third one, which you couldn't read at all. And he did that of 3 paces, walking paces, on an absolute flat pitch on which the England bowlers, the slow bowlers that is, who were at the time Phil Edmonds, the left armer, and John Embury, who never spun a ball in his life, they had taken 0 wickets for something like plenty in the first innings. And then we thought, okay, this is going to a draw, this is going to be so boring. And then this man appears and gives this unbelievable exhibition of the most difficult art form of spin bowling, which is leg spin bowling. And I was mesmerized. I was like the batsman, on the pitch who couldn't understand what was going on. I couldn't understand, but I knew one thing. It was beautiful to watch. And we were in touch with one of the great artists of world sport. And I think of any country, of any era.
I think you've exactly explained what this whole slot is supposed to be about, where you're witnessing something unfold and you believe that it's somebody in the hunt for or discovering a greater truth. 7 wickets for 96 runs. Did Pakistan win the test? I presume they did with those scores. No. Right.
They didn't, because they had taken their time to score their runs, and plenty of them over 700 in the first innings. And despite the fact, Abdul Qadir did take, I think, 3 wickets in the second innings, but England just basically dug in, and they drew with quite comfortably, actually, scoring 315 for 4 wickets, and with Mike Gatting scoring a typical Gatting innings, which was both prudent and sometimes brutal, and scoring 150 not out, and England were saved. So that's absolutely extraordinary. That's typical cricket. I've been at cricket games which, honestly, just thinking of them makes my spine tingle. The day when there were 4 innings in a day at Lord's against the West Indies, and I've been very lucky. I've been to loads of great moments of cricket, but this is a game that ended in a draw. And yet it is, I think, the single greatest performance I saw by any cricketer on the pitch.
You've picked a second cricket one as well. We may as well stick with the cricket and move on to the football. Yep. This is against England at the Oval in 2013. Why did you fall in love with cricket? Because I first of all, because I couldn't understand it. And therefore, since I'm curious by nature, I wanted to know, why are people getting so excited about this weird game? And I had a teacher who was, at the time, I arrived in London because I was, and I still am, a musician. And the person, the A&R, who signed me to an English label, called Mike Allway, and he was a cricket nut. And he kept talking about cricket. And I said, why keep talking about cricket? And he explained, he said, it's chess on grass. Right. And I'm a very keen chess player. I was actually quite a good club player at the time. And I thought, I've got to know more about that. Then I went to see a game. It was at Lord's between Middlesex and Warwickshire. And I was sitting quite next to the pitch. And this is where I realized that, my goodness, this is fast, this is incredibly technical, and this is extremely dangerous.
because I think Wayne Daniel was bowling that day, and he was bowling at 90 miles an hour. I'm thinking, how is this possible? And they looked frightened, some of the batsmen. I thought, there is more to this game. And then I started playing it very quickly. And since I was a decent tennis player, I realized, I could actually time the ball a little bit. And, you get the bug. I started reading about it, discovered that cricket is also one of those games which has inspired some of the greatest sports writing ever. And you put all this together, and the attraction of exoticism as well, because I was unused to sports where the main powers were like India and Pakistan. That's something that is simply not the case anywhere else apart from hockey. So there's all this. It's a fascination, and I caught the bug. I still have it more than ever. And I have to say that there is no day that I look more in the sporting calendar than that the first day that I spent at Lord's for the Test match, which I've done religiously for a number of years now.
Philippe, this second pick is Kumar Sangakkara, 134 not out versus England at the Oval. This was 10 years ago, June 2013. I'm curious, when there are opposition performances like Sangakkara or Kadir at the Oval, what's the atmosphere like amongst the English fans? Like, is it respectful? Is it almost awe at what an opposition player is doing, or is it quite the opposite?
Awe is the right word. First of all, obviously, cricket publics and crowds are very different from other crowds, because I think that even though you might have an incredibly strong link with your own team, and I do have an incredibly strong link with the England team, those link is even stronger to the truth of the game, and which is why when you have had the privilege of watching, I don't know, Sunil Gavaskar bat or Mohammad Azharuddin, or you've seen Shane Warne bowl, or I could go on like this forever. There is again a greater truth, and cricket is perhaps better at recognizing it than other games. And therefore, at the beginning, you're really quite annoyed because you want them out. You want them smashed to all parts of the ground. And then you realize, well, no, actually, this is pretty special. And in the case of Kumar Sangakkara, I mean, it was a one-day international as well, which is pretty unusual for me because I go to test matches rather than one days. One thing is that from the very beginning of that innings, I think everybody around the ground realized, oh my goodness, this is a little bit different. I've seen more spectacular innings with perhaps more memorable shots. I have never seen an innings in which a batsman was so much in control of what he was doing. And it's a point where you don't just applaud the beautiful shots, and there were plenty of those because, Sangakkara was a beautiful and such an elegant player and technically perfect. Even when he was blocking the ball, it was great because this was a master in total control of his art again. And the impression, there was a certain, at times, cricket, there is a certain dignity about some performances. It's like there is almost like a moral authority to an innings. And this was the case. I mean, Sangakkara, I think anybody who follows cricket will agree that he's one of the true greats. And I was lucky to see him perhaps at the very top of his game, where he made it look so simple, where, the arc of the bat was hitting the ball either for a cover drive or an off drive or even a pull was just perfection. And the crowd responded to that, enthusiastically. He got an ovation for his 100. And, that won the game, finished 134 not out, if I'm not mistaken. And Sri Lanka went through. And it was coming, by the way, on the back of a game in which the England bowlers had been extremely good and had been totally on top of things. This time that was not the case. And, Jimmy Anderson was bowling, Graham Swan was bowling, but Sangakkara was just, was the master at work, judging absolutely every single ball on its merits and finding a solution. He probably faced, 150 balls? I don't have the stats in my head. But every single one of those was perfectly judged, either blocked or let it go or just hit it. Magnificence, elegance, authority, and also humility, because Sangakkara is not one of those players who will make a lot of what he does. Is that's his nature. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to.
Can I ask you a question about your appreciation for this? You mentioned that you were a musician. I suspect most of the people who've been listening to you speaking to us for the last 20 odd years on Off the Ball didn't realise that you have an alternative exterior life. Does your appreciation for sport and the way you've spoken about it is very specific? Is it different, do you think, because of your background as a musician?
Possibly because of that, and of my background, full stop, because by training, I'm a philosopher and philosophy teacher, I won't use that word, philosophy teacher. So I do look at things perhaps a bit differently from some other people who do not have this kind of training. And then there's the music as well. And I think perhaps because of the type of music I do and the type of musician I am, I'm more sensitive to craftsmanship, not just artistry, but craftsmanship and what the amount of skill that you need to do something well, and the amount of skill you need to have to go beyond the point where people realize you have skill, that you master it to such an extent that it becomes natural. And people say effortless, which is the wrongest term to use in any kind of sport, because effortlessness is just the produce of incredibly hard work. And when multiple intellectual calculations and an extraordinary level of communication between the brain and the limbs and the body as a whole takes you somewhere else where you're totally on top of what you do, and which obviously in music is absolutely crucial. If you want to, the greatest virtuosi are not people who give you the impression they're really struggling through Sibelius' violin concerto, right? But believe me, they did in the past when they started to learn that. But then you can get to that level, which is what you should aspire to as an artist. And I believe that great sports people are people who precisely give this impression of ease and effortlessness. It's like Usain Bolt. People think, he's cruising to victory. No, he's not cruising to victory. He's been working like mad. He's phenomenally talented, yes, but he's been working like mad to make sure he could be that person who can fly on the asphalt or whatever it's called these days, and be faster than anybody else. And these are the moments when you see a sports person being able to be in communication with his own or their own art is something extra special. And Kumar Sangakkara, that innings was one of those moments.
That's so fascinating, because Ronnie O'Sullivan, I've heard an interview with him recently where he compared playing snooker to being a violinist in an orchestra, where connecting music to shots, and how he sometimes does that in his head, which completely ties into what you're talking about with cricket. It's a fascinating area, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not surprised, because he can give the impression of being effortless, can't he? Mm-hmm. And also because I think that also the beauty of his game perhaps has got something to do with it, that because it is so beautiful, you think it's easy. You think, these people are just super talented. Mm-hmm. No, they are super talented, but the way they work, their bodies and their brains work, is a produce of not just gift, but an extraordinary dedication to your own art. And I use the word art, a lot, because the artistic dimension of sport is something that, for me, is absolutely prevalent, and which is why there are some great sportsmen and great teams that really leave me totally cold.
Yeah,
I won't give names, because I don't find it. Because to me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have really any value.
Thierry Henry is on your list, so he obviously does not leave you cold.
Well, that's less of a surprise. Yeah. Well, he's on my list, and again, it could have been a few performances there. The game against Liverpool in the 2003-2004 season, but the one I've chosen was perhaps his masterpiece, which was February 2006. A very young Arsenal team goes to the Bernabeu, is not given a chance. It's in the Champions League, of course. Is not given a chance there, and we have the Thierry Henry masterclass. And again, somebody who seems taller than anybody else on the pitch, stronger than anybody else on the pitch, cleverer than anybody else on the pitch. And everybody around him, certainly in the Arsenal side, is taking their cue from him. And this is not, by the way, a small Real Madrid team, even if some of the players are past their best. But you've got Juti is there, Zinedine Zidane is there, Robinho is there, Raul is there, Ronaldo, David Beckham, Roberto Carlos, also Jonathan Woodgate, amazingly enough. He didn't last long. And in fact, across the pitch from them, you've got an Arsenal team which has a back four, which is Eboué, Touré, Sandaros, Flamini. So you don't give them much of a chance, against the Galacticos. But Thierry was just sublime all through the game. And obviously, the moment that sticks out is this goal, which I think everybody's seen, where he picks the ball. I think Cesc Fabregas gives him the ball just past the halfway line. And then suddenly you see all these Real Madrid players falling like nine pins or not knowing what to do. And he's totally toying with them. And he slots the ball almost nonchalantly in the Thierry Henry fashion, in a typical Thierry Henry finish, which is slightly to the left of the box, angled in the far corner. There's nothing you can do about that. And again, people will say, it comes so easily to Thierry. No. Because I've talked to Thierry about that kind of goal, and he explained to me, you know what, the reason why I find the net is because when I was at Monaco at the time, I think he was working with Rémi Garde at the time, or Claude Puel. He was working with Claude Puel. And he said, we must have done this thousands of times. He would stay over after training, and they would exactly rehearse that particular passage of play where he gets the ball on the left wing, goes back inside, and the shot across, and he beats the keeper every single time. And you could see, even I went absolutely berserk. I was in the press box, which is very, very bad indeed. But we were encouraged by the behavior of our Spanish colleagues. We were just above us at the Bernabeu, and who were cheering everything. And we thought after a while, sod it. We're going to be Spanish about this. And we all jumped up and celebrated like mad this goal, which was just after the beginning of the second half. And the Real Madrid audience, to give them their credit, actually applauded. And after the game, I remember going with my friend Amy Lawrence, probably know of The Guardian, and a few other gooners. We met in a bar in central Madrid, and we thought, okay, we've just beaten them. What's it going to be like? And in fact, people came to us and shook us by the hand and said, guys, you've got the greatest player on the planet. We wish we had him. We wish we had him. Which was very generous and very typical, it has to be said, of Real Madrid fans. And it was not just the goal, but I think there is another moment in that game which shows how much Thierry was in charge of everything. Arsenal were leading 1-0. Real Madrid were trying to have a go, but he got the ball. So it was in the dying minutes of the game. So it was all about, you know the one I'm talking
he runs
about?
past Ramos like he's not there.
Yeah, and he just literally pushes the ball alongside the touchline, and he runs past him. And the guy's just like, what? What does that thing? Then he goes towards the corner flag, and he gets a throw in for Arsenal, and the expression on his face as well is magnificent.
Well, he looks like he's not out of breath whatsoever.
No, it's like, that's easy. Just like the way he celebrated his goals. Because he's not known, apart from the famous goal against Tottenham, as somebody who really explodes when he scores. He's always somebody who tries to, or tried, unfortunately, to keep it within himself and to concentrate on the next goal. And he's never happy with himself, never ever. And even on this occasion, at Santiago Bernabeu, in the ground of a club, which, by the way, had tried to sign him a number of times before, and he had given a demonstration on the pitch of exactly why they were right to chase him, and we were extremely lucky to still have him at the Arsenal. He owned the pitch, which is something which is very rare in a team sport, because you could think that, for example, you would think of some of Lionel Messi's greatest performances, or Michel Platini's greatest performances, or Ronaldo Fenomeno greatest performances, and thinking, well, that was really illuminated the game. There are very few instances where it's almost down to a single player.
Yeah.
That the player, I mean, it's not to say that the other 10 players, actually 14 players, because there were some subs, didn't do their job beautifully, which they did. It was just that he was on a different plane. And it was a Thierry Henry at the time. People were starting to wonder if his powers were waning a little bit. Oh, no, they weren't.
I'm not surprised Thierry Henry made your list. I have to say, I did have a little bit of a giggle when I saw Clint Dempsey. Clint Dempsey is on your list for Fulham 4, Juventus 1 in 2010.
Yeah, and I have to say that I'm surprised. I surprised myself, because Clint Dempsey actually only played 29 minutes of that game as well. You know, and why did I choose that? Because of all the sporting events I've been at, this was the most emotional moment that I've lived, was when Clint Dempsey scored in the 82nd minute of that tie against Juve. I have never experienced anything like it, in terms of a communion between the players and the crowd and the reporters and the stewards. We were literally dancing in Craven Cottage, in the press box, which is that there's not a press box in Craven Cottage. You've got wooden benches and you're sat there. You've got absolutely no room. Your laptop is balanced on your knees. And I remember, I think I jumped in the arms of a steward who was next to me. And so did all the journalists around us, because we were perfectly placed. You know, it's one of those moments when, you know, you're exactly at the right place in the stadium, where you can see the arc of the ball. You see absolutely everything. And you could draw a line between where the ball nestles in the net, the shot, and yourself. It's a straight line. So the best angle possible. And the fact that it was a lob makes it even nicer, because you had the times that it's coming, it's in. And it capped an absolutely unforgettable evening. Fulham were not supposed to, I mean, they'd done already fantastically well to reach that stage in the competition. They were against Juve. Now, okay, there was a sending off of Cannavaro, blah, blah, but they still had to win 4-1, and they did win 4-1. And Clint Dempsey, bless him, scored that fourth goal. And for that reason, I had to pick him.
Fair enough. We're nearly out of time, but I do want to do some justice to this, because it's N'Golo Kanté again in a losing performance. You've picked something out that you think is emblematic of something, and actually there's a supercut on. I searched for this performance. Somebody's put a supercut together of all his touches, and it's amazing. He is amazing in this game.
I've got to watch that again, because it was Leicester was visiting Arsenal. And they lost that game really at the last gasp, 2-1. And actually, at the time, people thought, well, maybe that's the moment when Leicester's, rush for the title is coming to an end, and Arsenal scored an absolutely magnificent goal to win. But I don't think that any of us was prepared for N'Golo Kanté, because hardly any of us had seen him before. He'd arrived from French second division. Okay, he'd been playing a few games, and people were talking, saying, have you seen that midfielder? He's a bit special. And to see N'Golo Kanté in the flesh for the first time was a revelation. And all of us, what I would call seasoned observers of the game in the press box, were all looking at each other and all saying, you seen that Kanté guy? Have you seen that Kanté guy? I remember one moment in particular. He intercepted the ball, I think, just outside of his box, of the Leicester box, on the right-hand side. And I thought, that's pretty impressive. I just looked down and typed just 27th minute Kanté interception. I put my looked up. I said, where is he? Oh my goodness, he's there. He's managed. He's found the way to transport himself through space and time without me realizing it. And he was then doing exactly the same thing on the other side of the pitch, like 50 yards ahead. And then I started watching literally just him, and I realized, oh, it's not just the fact that he runs very quickly. It's not just the fact that he's incredibly strong for somebody of such small stature. It's because every single movement that player does on the pitch is the consequence of perfect reading of what is happening around him. This guy has got one of the greatest football brains I've ever seen. He knows how to be in the right place at the right time. Now, Claude Makélélé had it as well, in this kind of... But Claude Makélélé didn't quite have the kind of percussion, the kind of energy, almost kinetic energy that N'Golo Kanté could, exude on the pitch. And also, he was a beautiful passer of the ball outside of the boot, inside of the boot. He could pass first time. He knew when to pass the ball back, but he was also looking constantly, can I hit one of my midfielders? Can I hit Jamie Vardy or whoever up front? All the time. And one-to-one, no problem. He will win them all. But he was ubiquitous. And it was a revelation that, my goodness, here is a very, very special player, which is lovely, by the way. When this happens, you're at a game, you don't know that player, and suddenly that player jumps out, which is exactly, by the way, what I felt when I first saw Gabriel Martinelli in the Europa League for Arsenal later on. I thought, this player is just amazing. But N'Golo Kanté, my goodness, what can you say? And then from then on, he became the greatest midfielder on the planet.
Phillipe, that was a sensational episode of You Had to Be There. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your memories. Cheers.
No problem at all. My pleasure.